We're in the month of December, and there still are a lot of very good MLB free agents available. And the New York Mets haven't really done anything too notable as far as improving their team. So, in this video, I'm going to talk about some of those free agents that are still available and even some potential trade candidates I think the New York Mets should pursue. If you like this video, the best way to show your support is by leaving a like. Comment down below what are some players that you think the New York Mets should target that really have caught your eye. And if you're new here and you want to help the channel grow, you can subscribe. It's greatly appreciated. There's plenty of you watching that are not subscribed. Trust me, I see the numbers. And if you are subscribed already, well, you know what to do. You can tell a friend, tell a stranger, tell a neighbor, tell a coworker, tell a squirrel. You can even make an email address for that squirrel and hit the subscribe button. It is definitely greatly appreciated. So let's get right into it. Like I said in the beginning, the Mets haven't done anything too crazy quite yet. Yes, they did re-sign Edwin Diaz to a 5-year deal. Wouldn't have been my first move. I think that's probably the part of your team you should probably spend the least amount of money on. My concern would be hitting and starting pitching, and then you could work on the bullpen. But the New York Mets decided that Edwin Diaz was a big-time priority for him. He had a great year for the Mets last year, so they decided to pull off that contract. And then they had that deadline where Carlos Carrasco, they decided to keep him. I wasn't too crazy about that. I think that Carlos Carrasco, his best years are definitely behind him. He did not finish the season strong. He's had plenty of injuries as a Met, and as you get older, that continues to happen. I would not be surprised if we have another injury-plagued season for Carlos Carrasco this year. It's just part of getting old. Trust me, I know. The Mets still have quite a bit of expired free agents that are still on the market, particularly pitchers, starting pitching, and then a lot of guys in the bullpen. It's something we talked about all year on the Mets Weekly channel. And then even the rotation, it could have been even more expiring free agents had they not picked up that Carrasco option. 3 spots to fill in the starting rotation, and in my opinion, at least 6 to 7 spots in the bullpen. I know the moves that the Mets have made has been claiming off waivers, the Yankees or the Marlins. They've picked up plenty of guys along the way, young pieces, but guys that to me are not that proven. They're not guys that have had these big, full-length major league seasons. I would like to be looking at guys that are more proven, and then hopefully at least maybe 1 or 2 of these young pieces that the Mets have picked up can actually have an impact on the team this year. So let's look at the bullpen. I think that's where we will start off. And the Mets, they really got to pretty much build a bullpen from scratch. Other than having a closer, a lot of these other roles are up for grabs. So I separate them into multiple roles. The first thing is a swingman, a guy that could be the 6th starter if, let's say, there's a doubleheader, or let's say a pitcher gets scratched because of injury or illness, because that's still a thing that's going around. You're going to need somebody else to make some starts for you that has some major league experience. And the guys that I put out there are Andrew Heaney, Ryan Yarbrough, and Trevor Williams. I think these are guys that fit this role really nicely because they could give you quality but not great starts, and they just give you a very different look from the other pitchers that you have. Scherzer, right-handed pitcher, throws pretty hard. But you bring that guy like a Ryan Yarbrough as a soft tossing lefty, it's a very different look for the hitter. Where they're facing a right-hander the whole game, and then you get this lefty that's kind of a little funky, it really hurts the hitters because we know so much about 3rd time around the order, 4th time around the order. The hitters have a much better feel for what the pitcher is throwing and how it moves, but then you give them a completely different look. Even at Andrew Heaney, again, a guy who's left-handed that can give you multiple innings, it just gives you more options that you could utilize when it comes to pitching and strategy. And then even Trevor Williams, a guy that the Mets did have, I think he did a nice job because the Mets put him in so many different roles. Let's say there was a guy that got blown up. There are times where Carlos Carrasco could not go more than a few innings because he just was not pitching well. So you need somebody else to come in and still kind of keep you in the game and not tire out your entire bullpen. So you have that one guy like a Trevor Williams who gives you 3 to 4 solid innings, and then you can turn on to your middle relievers or your high leverage guys, just depending on how the game is going, if your offense helps you out a little bit. Let's talk about middle relief. This isn't something that gets talked about a lot, but still something that could be important for you. And some of the guys I put on here were Zach Britton, Carl Edwards Jr., Tommy Kahnle, Alex Reyes, Will Smith, Archie Bradley, and Corey Knebel. Zach Britton, I mean, again, we talked so much last year, the Mets could really use a better lefty in Joey Rodriguez. They could really use a second lefty. It's just a good thing to have in your bullpen, just to have different matchups. Or you could be like the Houston Astros and just have a bunch of really good hard-throwing right-handed pitchers, not need any lefties at all. That also is a possibility. Usually it's not a bad idea to have some lefties in there. And Zach Britton is a guy that's very interesting to me because he's had a lot of good years throughout his career with Baltimore. Buck Showalter didn't use the wild card game. We know that whole story. But Buck Showalter has managed him before. He was with the Yankees, so he's been in New York for quite some time. Zach Britton's had his injuries lately. That's why he is in this middle relief role. I mean, if this was the Zach Britton of old, he'd be in that really high tier of relievers. But because of the injuries, I think that Zach Britton is a guy that maybe you could get him, then not cost that much, and just take a flyer on him and see if he still has anything left to give you in the tank. So I think if you get him on a cheap deal, and he's the guy that you're not putting a lot of pressure on, you're using him in fifth inning, sixth inning, not really these high leverage spots, I think he could definitely do some effective things for you. Carl Edwards Jr. is another guy, veteran pitcher who's just been the National League East with the Washington Nationals. Just tends to put in a good, ERA every year. He may not be flashy, may not have the best advanced numbers, but he just tends to get the job done more times than not. Tommy Kahnle, another guy who was really successful with the Yankees. He finished the year with the Dodgers. He's also had plenty of injuries lately, but again, because of those injuries, it shouldn't really cost you too much to bring somebody like Tommy Kahnle in. And ideally, you don't want to go after injury-plagued guys. That's not something I'm normally advocating for. But I think that when it comes to the bullpen, how volatile it is, how tricky it could be, I tend to lean to guys that have just been good major league pitchers. I think that's all you really can do, and just hope for the best when it comes to bullpen, because you never really know who's going to have the breakout years and who's going to really regress. Next guy is Alex Reyes. He did not have a great year for the Cardinals, but he is a guy that has had good years in the past. He's still very young. He has good stuff. He can throw the ball hard, and I just think that he's a guy that, maybe Jeremy Hefner could work with him, and you could get the most out of Alex Reyes. Again, if you're not asking him to be your closer like he used to be, you're asking him just to be that middle relief guy. I think Alex Reyes can get the job done. Will Smith, another guy who's had closing experience, is left-handed. Didn't have a good year this year, but in the past has just been a very reliable reliever. I think, again, in this middle relief role, you might be able to find something in him. So again, this is all cost dependent. We've seen this year with relievers, a lot of guys getting multi-year deals. We saw what the Padres did with some of their guys. Obviously, the Mets with Edwin Diaz. Chris Martin just signed a multi-year deal. So I think that if any of these guys could get from 1 year only a few $1 million, I think it's something the Mets should be looking at with most of these guys. Archie Bradley, another one who, again, he doesn't put up great numbers, but it just seems that for quite a long time, Archie Bradley has been solid enough in the bullpen. I think that's what you need in that middle relief role. And then Corey Knebel. I know we've seen him have some pretty ugly eyes against the Mets, but if you talk to Carson from Mets Weekly, he'll tell you that the Phillies have not been using Corey Knebel right. The pitches that they ask him to throw, it's not really his strength. So if the Mets could utilize Corey Knebel's strengths and not have him be the closer, you definitely could get a really good pitcher in your bullpen. The next section we have is the high leverage guys. So that's about, around 7th inning, sometimes 8th inning. And the two guys that I have on here is Chad Green and Michael Fulmer. Chad Green, another guy who's a former Yankee. He's given up a few too many big home runs that you would normally like, but more times than not, Chad Green is getting the job done. Again, having that experience in New York is really important, because we know that New York is not made for everybody. So there's plenty of pitchers that you could like that are available, but if you could find a guy that has already played in New York, has had success in New York, that's a really good place to start. And Chad Green is not one of those guys that, coming off of injuries, it shouldn't cost you too much, because when we get to the starting rotation, we get to the lineup, like I said earlier, that's where you want to put your money towards. So if you're saving some money here with some of these older relievers, it might allow you to really focus on the rotation, allow you to get another big bat in this lineup. Guys like Pete Alonso, if you want to sign him long-term, you have the money to do that, because you're not giving a bunch of multi-year contracts to your relievers. You just have a bunch of one-year guys, a bunch of veterans. You see which ones stick, which ones don't. Then if they stink, you could just get somebody different next year. It's not like a Dylan Betances or Jerry's Familia situation where you're stuck with these guys for 2 to 3 years, and you're like, we have got to get rid of these guys. What are we going to do with them? When it's a one-year deal, it's very hard to have a bad one-year deal. And lastly, we have the setup man / second closer. The reason I put that is because there were some times this season where Buck Showalter utilized Edwin Diaz in the 8th inning against the heart of the opposing team's order, and then the Mets had to have somebody else actually get the save in the 9th inning. So the guys that I have here is Andrew Chafin, Taylor Rogers, David Robertson, and Kenley Jansen. Chafin is a guy that he makes just so much sense for this Mets bullpen. We've talked about him a lot for, it seems like, years now, because he's a left-handed pitcher who's just a really good pitcher and gets the job done. He's a guy that can make saves for you. You could bring him in with any role, and he could have a lot of success. I imagine that with the way this reliever market is going, he might cost quite a bit. So I'm not sure if the Mets are going to do that, but if the price is reasonable, he's someone they really should be targeting. And the same goes for Rogers. He's a guy that he didn't have his best year, but he's had good years in the past, and he's still relatively young. He's not like some of these other guys that are just way past their prime, but he is also left-handed and just has that closing experience. Being a closer is a lot of pressure. Not everybody can handle it. So again, if you could use a guy that already has some experience in that department, that's definitely a plus to have somebody who's been there before. And the same goes for David Robertson. He's a guy that he has been a closer. He's a guy that has made some saves. He's a guy that has pitched in New York, and he's pitched well very recently with the Philadelphia Phillies. And before that, at the trade deadline with the Chicago Cubs. Now, David Robertson, he's up there in age. I don't think he has too many good years left in him. He's a guy that he is so old that he's a one-year deal or nothing. Unfortunately, I love David Robertson, but I'm not going more than a one-year deal on him. It's just way too risky for a multi-year deal on a guy at that age. And then Kenley Jansen, I know he had his blow-ups in the second half of the season, but he's a guy that, you know what, he's going to be a Hall of Fame closer. And if he's your setup man on a one-year deal and he's not on the Atlanta Braves just destroying you every single time, because whenever the Mets face Kenley Jansen, he becomes prime Kenley. So I think he's a guy that he has a lot of experience. He has playoff experience. So he's a guy that wouldn't be too bad to have in that bullpen compared to some of the other guys that we've seen. Because when we look at the Mets 40-man roster, I'll tell you what, I feel a lot more comfortable with Kenley Jansen than I did with Trevor May and than I did with plenty of the other guys the Mets have used in the past. Now let's get to starting pitching. This definitely is a big one. Starting pitching is very, very important if you want to be a successful team. You want to go deep in the playoffs. You want to make the playoffs in the first place. Having a really good rotation is very important. Justin Verlander, Carlos Rodon, Nathan Eovaldi, and Chris Bassett, Sean Manaea, Jose Quintana, Jameson Taillon, and Michael Wacha. Verlander is an interesting one because he has been so good for so long. He's done it in the playoffs and things like that. But again, he's up there in age. And with Verlander, again, it's a one-year deal for me. I know Verlander, he's probably looking for 2 or 3 years, but to me, it's 1 year or nothing. Carlos Rodon's a pretty interesting guy, but he's had back-to-back really strong seasons. He's had some injury problems, nothing too drastic. So if his medicals still are in check, he definitely is a really good guy to pursue. He is left-handed, and he's a guy that just gets the job done. He'd be a really nice top-end guy to pair with Max Scherzer. So when I'm looking at Eovaldi and Bassett, I'm looking at them as those number 3 pitchers, maybe even number 4. Depending on how the Mets go about it when we get to trades at the end. Eovaldi is a guy that, you know, the things that I like, postseason experience, has played in New York, has had multiple quality seasons at the major league level. He's had his injuries as well, but for the most part, he is healthy. He gets through the season and he just puts up really good numbers. He's someone I've always enjoyed watching. I've always thought he's a very solid pitcher, very consistent, and that's when you need to have that number 3 spot because Bassett, you know, the one thing I liked about him is that he had so many outings where he went deep into games, 7 innings, 8 innings. He made just about every single start. He only missed 1 due to illness. And I think that that's something that's really important when you have 2 aces that are older and have their injuries. You needed somebody else that you could count on every 5th day. And Bassett was that guy for the Mets. Like just about everybody else, he didn't pitch great against Atlanta in September. Wasn't great in the playoffs. But other than that, he really was a big part of why the Mets even got to above 100 wins in the first place because it wasn't so much what Bassett did on the days that he pitched. It was more so that because of what he did, it allowed you to have a rested bullpen for the times when Carrasco pitched, when Taijuan Walker pitched, when Trevor Williams pitched. You were able to win those games because Chris Bassett gave you the rested bullpen for those other starters when they pitched. This is where I'm looking at maybe a number 4 or a number 5 starter. You know, Carrasco is going to have one of those spots. And then one of these guys has one of the other ones. Sean Manaea is a guy that he didn't have a great year this year, but has had good years in the past, left-handed. So he's a guy that he still intrigues me a little bit. Jose Quintana, pretty nice bounce-back year for him, a lefty. Jameson Taillon, he's a guy that he's had some ugly starts, but New York experience, and as a back-end guy, he's perfectly fine. And then Michael Wacha, I know he's been a Met and he was not good as a Met, but you know what? You go to Tampa Bay, they fix you and they find whatever was wrong, they make some tweaks and they get you back on track. I think that the Michael Wacha now is very different than the Michael Wacha that the Mets had. I think that with those adjustments that he was able to make in Tampa Bay, you got yourself a brand new pitcher. So I think that he's a guy that, again, on a short-term deal, not at high AV, he might be able to provide some value for you. Even if he's as a 6th starter in that swingman role that we talked about earlier, I'd be fine with that as well. But let's get to the hitting. This is where we have some fun. So as far as the tier 1 hitters, the guys that could really make an impact in your lineup, the big 3 to me are Aaron Judge, Trey Turner, and Carlos Correa. Xander Bogaerts, Dansby Swanson, those are guys that it would be tougher for them to have a fit with the Mets. I think with Aaron Judge, it's much easier if you put him in center field or right field and you move Marte to center. With Trey Turner, he's a guy that can play second base. He can play center field. They're not his best positions, but it's something he can do. Carlos Correa can play third base if he wants to. That'd be pretty much the deal breaker with him. But I think, you know what, in the WBC, he's going to be playing third base next to Lindor. So maybe it's something that he does. He's like, hey, I kind of like this. I could get used to this. And then he does it for the Mets. Now, will Correa sign before the WBC? Probably, but if he's still available and if they have that experience together, maybe Lindor could do some pretty good recruiting and get Correa to the Mets. I personally would love that. I think he'd be a great fit for this lineup. You need somebody with the power that's looking to hit the ball out of the ballpark, and Correa is somebody that's done that. Again, playoff experience and done well in the playoffs. Not just played in the playoff games, but had a lot of big playoff moments. I think that's something that Correa, having that in your lineup would be really good because we saw so many of these hitters in the Mets lineup They hadn't been in a playoff game before. McNeil, Alonso, Nimmo, this was their first playoff game. So I think that having a guy that's been there and done that is really important to have in your lineup. The tier 2 guys, Wilson Contreras, Josh Bell, Andrew Benintendi, and Mitch Haniger. And I think Wilson Contreras, well, why would we do that? We have Francisco Alvarez, but James McCann is still on this team. He's still getting paid $10 million a year. So it doesn't seem like Francisco Alvarez has that catcher spot won just yet. And also, the Mets still need a DH. Like, Daniel Vogelbach is not an everyday player to me. So if it's up to me, if Contreras is my DH, so be it. I mean, Contreras, he could even play a little bit of left field if he needed to. Sometimes. I'm not saying he should be a full-time player, but sometimes he could be a left fielder. Sometimes he could be your catcher. So he's just a guy that I feel like the bat is so good, you'll find a spot for him. He mashes left-handed pitching, and he's done it for years, and the Mets for years have struggled against left-handed pitchers. So Wilson Contreras, while defensively he may not be a perfect fit, he still is a perfect fit offensively. So I think he's a guy that he's probably going to get overpaid somewhere else, but it's something that I'd be willing to consider. Even if I have to buy out James McCann or do whatever to get rid of him, I still think he could provide value to the team. You don't have to rush Alvarez as much. If you want Alvarez to be the DH this year and then maybe start catching next year or something like that and flip these guys, it's something to consider. I mean, you give Wilson Contreras a Correa type deal you got with Minnesota, 3 years, opt out of the first year, give him a bunch of AAV, who knows? Josh Bell is a guy that he would be a DH for the Mets, and at least since he's a switch hitter, he's a guy that could be an everyday DH for the Mets and not just against righties or just against lefties, as a guy that has prolific home run hitter power, which is something that the Mets need in this lineup because there's too many guys that they're trying to draw walks. They're not hitting the ball out of the ballpark. Even Vogelbach, he looks like he's a power hitter, but he's not a power hitter. He's a guy that's looking to draw walks first before he's trying to hit out the park. Andrew Benintendi is a guy that I look at that if I'm going to bring him in, it's if I don't re-sign Brandon Nimmo. That's the only way I'm adding Andrew Benintendi because Benintendi is very similar to a lot of the hitters in this Mets lineup. He's similar to a McNeil, similar to Mark Canha, where he's an on-base guy. He's not a guy that's going to be hitting a lot of home runs, but he's a guy that can play left field. He has played center field in the past. He's a guy that he played in New York, didn't play as well. He finished the year with an injury. So there are those red flags with him, but more times than not, you are getting a pretty quality all-around player in Andrew Benintendi. And then Mitch Haniger, he had his injuries this season. He didn't have his best year, but in years past, he's been a guy really good against left-handed pitching, just been a very solid hitter. He's a guy that if you want to make him your everyday DH, I'm good with that as well. If you want to make him your right fielder and move Marte to center, again, I don't love that, but it is a possibility for the Mets because I think that as we see the way this offseason has progressed and we see how many teams Brandon Nimmo is linked to, I think that we have to realize that the Mets may not keep Brandon Nimmo. So they have got to have some other backup plans just in case. And what worries me is that since Brandon Nimmo is a Scott Boras free agent, Boras is willing to wait this thing out. Boras will wait till March. He'll wait till February before his client makes the decision. And I just don't, and it's risky for the Mets to wait with him. And the Mets let these other guys go. They let Mitch Haniger get signed. Andrew Benintendi gets signed. Other center field potential guys get traded to other teams while the Mets are just waiting for Nimmo. Nimmo signs with another team, and now the Mets have no backup plans because they just waited for Nimmo and all these other guys are already gone. So I think it's something that the Mets have got to plan for now because you don't want to start the year with a hole in the lineup like that. And then tier 3 guys, these are guys that are more of bench pieces, guys that are like utility players, things like that. Sometimes they start Brandon Drury, Brian Anderson, Jurickson Profar, Chad Pinder, Cody Bellinger, Michael Conforto, Trey Mancini, Edwin Rios. Brandon Drury, a guy that has played for the Mets, he did really well in a pinch hitter role. He hit lefties really well this season. He's a guy that I still wouldn't trade a top 10 prospect for, but on a 1-year deal, 2-year deal, not too crazy AAV, I would do it just because he could play a lot of different positions. And like he's been in Met uniform before, he's a guy that definitely could fit this team because the Mets have so many guys on their bench that they're not very versatile. You know, Vientos, Ruff, Vogelbach, Alvarez. They're not guys that really could do too many other things. They're just kind of there to hit. Guillorme could play the infield, but that's one guy. When Guillorme gets hurt, you're looking at Devin Marrero being your next backup infielder. At least Brandon Drury can play the corners a little bit, not particularly well, but in an emergency, he can. Brian Anderson, another guy similar. He mostly a third baseman, but he can play the outfield a little bit. He's had some injuries. He had a down year, but he's a guy that as a bench bat, as a utility guy, he definitely could provide a lot of value to. Jurickson Profar, same thing. He's a guy that he was the starting left fielder for the San Diego Padres this season, but he's a switch hitter that's played a ton of different positions situations in the past. He did really well against the Mets in the playoffs. The guy that not mind times throughout the course of the season, because don't forget, it's 162. You're going to have injuries and things like that. Chad Pinder, Oakland Athletics, another guy, utility, played a lot of different positions. Not a great player, but a solid utility guy, because the Mets, they don't really have a guy that plays infield and outfield that isn't Jeff McNeil. Cody Bellinger, I realize this would be a bit of a project to work on, but we know that Bellinger, even though he's had his struggles offensively, he can still give you that quality defensive center field, and he still is 27 years old, so he has more offensive potential than Kevin Kiermaier, than Jackie Bradley Jr. He's a guy that if somehow either his back or bat or both could get fixed, he's a guy that could do a lot of good things for you on the baseball field. If he's your fourth outfielder, that's fine with me, because every now and then he still could run into one. That's a lot more than we could say for plenty of the backup outfielders the Mets have had for the past decade or so. Byron Conforto, I mean, this is a pretty obvious one. He was a Met. He had his injury. His market, who knows what it is. He's a guy that can play the outfield for you. He can be your full-time DH. And this guy that shouldn't cost too much, so it's something to consider. Trey Mancini, he's a guy that can be your full-time DH. He didn't have a good second half, but that's a guy that because he didn't have a good second half, you might be able to get him for a pretty good deal. I like him way more than Darren Ruff. I like him more than Mark Vientos, because Vientos, he didn't show us too much on the major league level. At least Trey Mancini has some major league experience and has done well in the major leagues before, and for his career has been really good against left-handed pitching and is not 37 years old. He's only 31. And then Edwin Rios, he's a guy that he also plays multiple positions. He's got a nice left-handed swing, so if you get him just as an extra bench piece, he's a guy that definitely he could fit in on any team pretty much. He's had some nice moments for the Dodgers, so he's someone that, again, should not cost much but can still help out at the ball club. Now here's the spot where we really have fun, trades. These are some other options for the Mets, particularly where they have their biggest weaknesses, their biggest holes. Brian Reynolds and Ian Happ. Those are the two center field options that are out there in the trade market, in my opinion. The other guys, I mean, if someone else becomes available, great, but these are the two guys that are most likely to be moved because of how bad their teams are and the way their contracts are set up. Both of them are expiring free agents. Brian Reynolds, there's been trade rumors with him in the past. Ian Happ, there hasn't, but the Cubs are just dumb, honestly. They do weird stuff, so they should just trade Ian Happ already. But those are guys, both switch hitters that give you quality offense. Brian Reynolds has some speed. Their defense isn't great, but it's passable, and it keeps Starling Marte in the corner where he belongs. Marte, he had his injuries this past season. He played through some of them. He's only getting older. I don't think it's the best idea to have Marte play center field. I think he should stay in the corner at his advanced age. So you let one of these younger guys like Reynolds or Happ play there. And I think you only do these trades if obviously Brandon Nimmo does not resign, because to get one of these guys, you're going to have to move some pretty good prospects. Now, we're going to talk about untouchable prospects probably sometime next month, but I would say when it comes to any of these trades, the three guys I'm not moving is Francisco Alvarez, Brett Beatty, and Alex Ramirez. Anybody else we could trade. I'm willing to move. I just think that when you look at long-term futures and fits on the team, those are the three guys that are just very important because of the positions they play. Alvarez at catcher, Beatty at third base, Ramirez in center field. Other than that, those positions could be pretty secured for a long time. You have Lindor at short. McNeil could be your second baseman for a few more years. Alonso could be your first baseman for a long time. Marte's still here for a few years in the corner. And you could find corner outfielders here and there along the way. It's not that hard of a position to find. But center field, third, and catcher, those are three hard positions to find. So those three prospects I'm keeping. But Mauricio, Vientos, any of the pitching prospects, I'm willing to move any of them to get one of these two big-time center fielders on the team. Here's some starting pitchers I'm looking at. Zach Gallen, Corbin Burns, Brendan Woodruff, Tyler Glasnow, any of the Cleveland Guardians starting pitchers, whether that's Cal Quantrill, Tristan McKenzie, Shane Bieber, Aaron Savali, I don't care who, anybody from the Guardians rotation, because Cleveland is one of those organizations that even though they'll put together good seasons, they're not going to spend money. So they'll end up trading all or some of these guys. So if you could get at least one of them, these guys are just young, quality pitchers, which is so important to have on your team. Guys that have contract control, team control. So I'll take any of those guys from Cleveland. And then when it comes to Minnesota, they're another team that they were just disappointing. So guys like Sonny Gray, Tyler Mahle, Kenta Maeda, they're all solid starting pitchers that can help out your ball club. And they're guys that I like more than a lot of the other starting pitcher free agents. So I think that Minnesota is a team that they should consider moving some of these guys because they were under 500 even after signing Carlos Correa. And I don't see Correa staying there. So I only imagine Minnesota gets even worse. So I think that maybe some of these guys, should be on the move, I would hope. And then the last thing, the Chicago White Sox bullpen. They have a lot of interesting trade candidates, in my opinion, because the White Sox are another team that they were very disappointing this season. They did not live up to expectations. So when you have quality relievers, you probably should be looking to trade them because they're hot commodities. So guys like Aaron Bummer, Jake Diekman, Kendall Graveman. I don't think they're going to move the likes of a Michael Kopech or a Garrett Crochet, but if they did, I would take either one of them. I don't think they're going to move Liam Hendricks just yet. They might because of the contract if you take that on. And Lance Lynn, I don't think they'll move him, but if they do, I'd be looking at him. The one guy I definitely don't see the moving is Dylan Cease. I don't want the Mets to settle because of that. Be like, oh, well, these other guys signed. I guess we're just a bunch of just okay starting pitchers. Don't settle. Get the guys you like. That's my philosophy, and that's when these trades come in. As far as for me, a dream offseason, I think Aaron Judge should be their top priority. I think he would help the Mets so much. He'd be such a perfect fit for this lineup and just really take them to the next level. You know, they need a power bat. They need power protection behind P. Alonso. They need somebody that can play center field, has done it in New York. It's just everything you possibly need. Aaron Judge is that guy. But Aaron Judge seems unrealistic. Trey Turner seems unrealistic. But I think the Mets, if at minimum, should be looking at a Josh Bell or Mitch Haniger that deep because back and Ruff and Vientos and Alvarez. It's just like, they got to figure out what they're doing there. I just don't think a platoon works. You just need to have quality players. It doesn't matter if this righty crap, lefty crap. Same goes for the bullpen. Just have good players and win some baseball games. That's all it comes down to. It doesn't need to be rocket science. So I want to see the Mets get a true guy that could be a DH and face righties and left. I would really love to, like I said, add Cody Bellinger's fourth outfield. That's something very high on my priorities list. Get at least one of these utility players, whether that is Drury, Anderson, Profar, Pinder, one of those guys. I would like to see them do it. I need to have at least one of Verlander Rodon. I would love to get Eovaldi instead of Bassett. You give me a Jose Quintana or Jameson Taillon as the number 5 starter. That's something I'm really looking at. I would love for them to get Ryan Yarbrough. That's someone I'm really high on. As far as middle relief, like I said, Tommy Kahnle or Zach Britton, those are the two guys I'm looking at the most. Maybe even Will Smith. I think Chad Green is really good for them. And then Chafin, Rogers, or Robertson. I want at least one of those guys. That's the way I would approach it if I'm the Mets. So again, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure you tune into the Mets Weekly channel. You get plenty of content there from Carson Andrew. I'll be making appearances there as well. We'll have plenty of more stuff coming in the new year. As far as videos for me, if you guys have suggestions, please leave those in the comments. But mostly it's going to be reacting to a lot of big signings, whether that's with the Mets or other teams. Make sure to be on the lookout for that. Again, let me know what players you want to see the Mets target. And until next one, be safe, be smart, be healthy. Let's go Mets. Go sign some freaking players already.